Welcome back to the Learn How to Use WonderLogix Studio training series. In this episode, we're going to continue building our water supply system. Okay, so under what conditions do we want the pumping system to set the failure state? There are a couple of things that could occur that would be a failure for us. So the pumping system will set a failure state. One of them is when the backup pump unit reports a failure. So remember how our pumping system works from the oil lubrication system that we imported here? The main pump unit, if it fails, will cause the backup pump unit to operate. And if the backup pump unit fails, then we want to set this failure state. So the backup pump unit will have to report a failure. That's true. And then we're going to go over here and say or, because there's another condition. Also, if the wellhead does not report that the level's okay, right? So if there's not enough water to be pumped, that's also a reason for a failure. You can't pump without the water. So we'll click that. And now we have our new failure state logic. And you'll notice it went from red or orange where it was warning into a gray, meaning we've now resolved that issue with the logic verifier. Okay, now in the wellhead itself, we're going to fix the level OK output. Notice it's got quite a few issues in there. You see that here, if you can click on the red, that'll take you right to where the issue is. And so that the level OK is the one that we need to fix. So we're going to open up the logic editor by double clicking on the logic box. We're going to delete this. And we're going to say that the wellhead will report that the level's okay only while the level switch high reports active. And that is true. As long as we have water, then we can make sure that things can be pumped. And that's when we know that the level's okay. All right, so now when we look at our system, we can see we just have this one orange state here on the water well. And this tells us that there's no logic defined yet for enabling the pumping system. And so that's okay because we haven't gotten that far on what it's going to take back here at this level to tell the water well that it can do what it needs to do. We can turn off the verify model logic by clicking this return to navigation mode, this little blue circular arrow here. That'll turn that mode off. We don't always need to leave that on. And so now we want to be able to work on our water well. So we need to have an input and an output here from our water well. So we're going to click the input side of our water well. We're going to ask it to operate the water well. And then if the water well is having an issue, it needs to be able to report a failure out. So we'll add that there. Let's go into the water well. And now, because when we give the command to operate the water well, we want to enable the pumping system, and that's the only condition with which we need to enable the pumping condition, we can just let our arrow, our mouse arrow, go over the end of the operate arrow, and you can see it turns into a four-headed arrow there. You just click. You see that wire? That's our direct wire that says these two are now going to be equal. And that'll automatically give us the logic sentence and making them equal. So we'll enable the pumping system only while the water well receives operate. And there we go. And now you may ask, what's the difference between using operate or enable? You can use any word that you like as your input. We recommend verbs for your input. And operate is an imperative verb, right? So it's a command. We want you to operate this water well. Enable is really more of a what they call a modal verb or a permission-based verb. So we often will use enable if there's a subsystem that has the ability to kind of figure out whether it's really ready to run or not on its own. So while we do want to operate the water well, we're allowing the water well's pumping system to figure out if it's ready to go, but we're giving it that permission saying you are ready to go, you're enabled. If you're ready to go internally, then go ahead and go. So sometimes we'll stick to these words, operate and enable, quite often. And in like fashion, we'll also direct connect the failure of the pumping system to be what reports the failure out of the water well. So the water well will report a failure out when the pumping system reports failure. And we'll check that, and that completes our logic for that part of the water well. Let's go back to the root level out here. There's our water tank and our water well. Okay, and so while we're at this level, let's put an output on the water tank to tell us when the filling is required. So filling required. So at this point, we haven't set up the conditions to tell us when filling is required, but we can go ahead and create that output on the water tank and actually get it connected to the water well so that we know to operate it when the filling is required. So let's open the logic editor here. And we're going to say to operate the water well only while the water tank reports filling required. Okay, in our next episode, after we finish doing some work on the water tank, we'll set up the conditions where we need to be able to signal that filling is required So before you watch the next video, try to think about which of the below logic connectors we might use. So we'll use one of these 4 logic connectors so that when the water level drops below 40, we request the pump to be turned on, and once it reaches 60 or goes over 60, then we want it to cut off. Which one of these connectors would we say that the water tank wants the pump to work during which of these conditions? Okay, that's a good stopping point. We'll see you in the next lesson.